Well, we just had 4 central bankers give us their thoughts on hopes and concerns and issues for the market, rates, inflation, including Jerome Powell. Here's a breakdown of everything that we just learned. First of all, Jerome Powell made one of the biggest hit comments of the entire event, in my opinion, when he made it clear that his goal isn't to specifically target one sector like the stock market and say, we've got to drive the stock market down. Sarah Eisen tried to corner him into that maybe 2 or 3 different times, and he reacted multiple times and said, no, I don't see it that way. He says, our job is inflation. That's our job. And we look at many different variables. It's interest rates. It's the banking crisis. It's other banks. It's credit spreads. It's the bond market. Yeah, to some extent, stocks are involved in that, but they're just part of a bigger picture of everything that goes in. It's commercial real estate. It's everything together in a bucket, the entire economy. And if they can get the entire economy to just slow down the rate of inflation while maintaining at least some equilibrium in the jobs market or getting to an equilibrium in the jobs market, then that's a good thing. That actually led the stock market to start rallying after Jerome Powell said that, because it was clear that Jerome Powell's comments back in the Jackson Hole days of September of 2022, that we're going to experience pain and this is going to suck, basically are not to be interpreted as the only goal of the Fed is to destroy the stock market. In fact, the Fed's basically in response to Jerome Powell, or in response to Sarah Eisen saying, hey, but markets are going up. She specifically said the MSCI World Index is rallying. Isn't this counterintuitive to what the Fed is trying to do or central banks are trying to do? And the broad answer was no. In other words, let markets rally. Let them do what they want. In fact, markets have generally been very good at pre-anticipating Fed actions. And if you actually think back, this is kind of interesting. Think back to November of 2021. That was roughly the peak, which means we had a red December, January, February, March. We had 4 months of red in the stock market before the Fed actually started hiking rates in March of 2022. So there's this pre-work markets like to do, much like what I expect now, that markets are pre-pricing in the future that the Fed will have inflation under the appropriate level of control that they're looking for, and the Fed will eventually, along with other central bankers, eventually start cutting rates. This is where Sarah Eisen also suggested, hey, so you're probably going to, keep rates restrictive for a while because, after all, you don't think inflation will come down to 2% until 2025, Jerome Powell. And Jerome said, well, no. And he essentially, without reiterating and re-explaining the formula, he reiterated the formula, which is if inflation expectations fall, you could actually start loosening Fed policy, lowering rates, and still technically be at a restrictive level as you're cutting rates. So I think people think that being at 5% means we're at restrictive, but that's not how it works. Being at 5% is the combination of a restrictive level of rates, 2%, and inflation expectations, say 3%. Add that together, you get 5%. Well, if inflation expectations go down to 2, you could have a restrictive level of 2% and then have top rates be 4%. And this is what Jay Powell reiterated here, which is great because he gave us 2 really big pieces of info. As inflation expectations come down, we'll cut rates. And do we care if the stock market rallies? No. What we care about is inflation trending down. Now, those are the 2 positive things that we got from Jay Powell. Some of the negative things that we got from Jay Powell were that he does expect the pain in commercial real estate to be persistent. This is not good because real estate is a very slow-moving Goliath. And it's weird because we know there's this pain coming for commercial real estate beyond what's already been felt. You've got $3 trillion of real estate refinancing coming up in over the next 3 years, a lot of it for offices and commercial real estate, which is going to be a big problem. You don't have the privilege or the luxury of these 30-year fixed-rate mortgages. So you're probably going to have some reevaluation of basically property prices for the next few years. And we're not sure how that's going to trickle over to residential, like single family or smaller apartment buildings. Nobody knows. Everybody's expecting inventory to go up, but it's just not yet. So while we're not clear what's going to happen to residential real estate, Jerome Powell does expect persistent pain for commercial real estate. The good news is he doesn't expect that we will have as his base case a kind of hard landing, that we'll have to have the kind of joblessness that we've had in previous down cycles this time around because we have so many excess job openings. So in other words, we can afford to lose jobs because people can go get the other jobs that are available and actually not end up unemployed permanently. This is a good thing. So Jerome Powell gave us a mix of optimism and some pessimism. Now, one thing that I thought was very interesting was he specifically addressed what is happening as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act and all of this spending. I call it stimulus checks going into the chips industry. It's one of the reasons I started investing in chips after the CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act got passed late last year. So this is basically stimulus money for these sectors. So Sarah Eisen rightfully so asked, hey, isn't that going to show up as inflation? And Jerome Powell said, well, certainly you're seeing more construction as a result of this, but we're not seeing that as a broad contributor to where we're seeing inflation right now, which is really core services driven by labor, in part driven by labor, or mostly driven by labor. So while construction is up, we're not actually seeing this fiscal impulse as an inflationary impulse. If anything, it's actually potentially a slight negative. And I thought that was pretty incredible as well as, of course, Jerome Powell's thought that we're not going back to 2% inflation probably until 2025. In other words, everything's just going to take a lot longer. And that's reasonable. The good news is, between now and then, you can be sure if you join those programs on building your wealth, there are going to be a lot more lectures between now and 2025. So over the next 3 years and beyond, I expect to just continue updating the courses with more lectures and more value. So when you lock in your price now, you get that value for the years into the future. Think about this. I've been selling courses on YouTube for 6 years. Somebody who bought the courses 6 years ago is still getting more value for free today. You can be one of those folks locking in those prices, guaranteed for life. Link down below. Email us for bundles at staff@meetkevin.com. So then we get to the European Central Bank. The European Central Bank definitely sees, Christine Lagarde definitely sees their economy as somewhat stagnant, but they actually think they'll be able to avoid a recession. And they also don't think we're probably going to get to that 2% level until about 2025. ECB was probably the only one that really doubled down on the idea of a central bank digital currency. Despite the fact that all of the central bankers are working on a central bank digital currency, she seemed really excited about it. The Bank of Japan, one comedy here for sure. There were multiple cases where the Bank of Japan just got the room to bust out laughing. One of them, which I thought was really brilliant, but went over most people's heads and under most people's knees, was this joke he made. He says, look, everybody else is talking about digital currencies. What we decided to do instead was just issue more paper money because printing money is going to instill more confidence in the Bank of Japan. It took a while for people to actually capture what he was saying, but he's basically saying, hey, we're trying to get inflation up. Everybody else is trying to get inflation down. We're trying to get inflation up. So to increase confidence people have in the Bank of Japan's ability to get it up, we're just going to print more money. Forget digital currency. We're just going to print straight up more money. That's essentially what they're actually doing. It's kind of weird to have a panel of 3 people cutting and fighting inflation, and the Bank of Japan no, we're just trying to get it up, man. Come on, man. Help us out over here. Some pretty good jokes. Anyway, the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, he kind of sits there the whole time. He's like, well, let me rate which glass of wine I prefer right after I finish my caviar. He's kind of got that whole demeanor about him. Christine Lagarde is very much like your aunt. You will drink your tea. And Jerome Powell is very much like I think we'll get to 2% by 2025, but I don't know. Can't be committed to it. Andrew Bailey, on the other hand, is there are signs of persistent inflation, and we need to make sure that to practice price stability because markets don't think we're done. And now the question is, how long are we going to sustain the peak when we get there? And then when he talks about central bank digital currencies, he gets into this arcane language of well, we have implemented the wiring for the wholesale payment systems. Okay, in plain English, basically Andrew Bailey said, Yo, man, I just copy what J-Pow does, and when he gets to peak, that's probably when we're going to get to peak. Okay, we talk all the time, but I just want to get back to the wine and cheese. That's what I came here for. And regarding these central bank digital currencies, so we got banks. We got big banks, bigly banks. I don't know why we're changing the accent so much here, but let's go with it. We got bigly banks, and bigly banks send big amounts of money. Sometimes, very small amounts of times, but they send bigly amounts of money, and we think digital currencies will help us with that for those bigly transactions that happen very infrequently. That's basically what the wholesale payment system is. It's big transactions that happen very rarely. Anyway, so that's your Andrew Bailey. Quite frankly, he didn't tell us virtually anything useful. Other than making us think he's really good at rating wine, and he didn't even mention wine once. But if you watched it, you'd probably have a similar impression. The dude from the Bank of Japan's like, I didn't think I'd have to travel this much for this job. And then Christine Lagarde is like trying to explain what a catch-22 is, but didn't do a great job. So really, bottom line out of the whole thing is it was about 90 minutes of 30% comedy, 60% boring kind of reiteration of the same crap, and 10% of, oh, okay, that's pretty interesting. And that's what I'm trying to provide as the bottom line here. So basically, bottom line out of all of it, hey, all this crap's going to take a lot longer than everybody expected. The transitoriness is going to take a whole lot longer to get through. But that doesn't mean we're not going to cut rates. We just need to confirm that inflation isn't going to spike up again like it did in England. And actually, even though we were looking for a sign of patience from Jerome Powell, he made it clear that time is not our friend. That's because he specifically said time is not our friend. Because inflation expectations could de-anchor, and they don't want that to happen. So, that said, and be cautious about commercial real estate. So, that said, and then of course the argument that like stocks don't necessarily have to go down, which was quite useful. So all of that together, I think adds some decent insight into what we could expect from this these central bankers going forward. It is some reasonable degree of patience, is what I would call it. I don't think it's unrestrained patience. They still have a job to do, and they're going to continue with that. But otherwise, overall sounded optimistic. Nobody felt like they had lost control. Nobody was freaking out at the meeting. So this is by no means a Jackson Hole. If anything, it was very much the opposite of it. Very calm, very relaxed, it is what it is. Let's just get through it. And I think that's why markets are recovering the way they are. So there you have it. Thank you so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, and good luck. Now, I want you to know this. When it comes to AI, time is what's going to make you money. And if you can prove that value to an employer, you'll always be able to be employed. So this is another way of making sure that you don't get replaced